Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams D Podcast Record Club, where we review a new record every week that is recommended by one of our 5 members and discuss it. This week, we already covered the main episode, which is on the new album by Foxing and the new album by Lingua Ignota. So if you haven't seen that already, go check that out and then come right back here because we're talking about Saoirse's recommended album this week by a little band you might have heard of named Pink Floyd, and it might be one of their records, Wish You Were Here.
Racing.
Little oft-mentioned record. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Pink Floyd, Saoirse, and why you picked this record?
I would love to. So Pink Floyd are an interesting band in my life. My mother was a hardcore fan, so and my dad was my dad was a Bowie fan, but like an early days Bowie fan. So the amount
like self-titled.
Excuse me. Like Ziggy Stardust, Hunky Dory.
I'd love early days Bowie because that can be like 16 albums because he did like 2.
I'm just imagining Saoirse like being christened into this world by listening to like Ian Fish, UK Air.
My dad's favorite Bowie song is Laughing Gnome. But no, so the amount of car rides I had in my youth that existed of listening to this amazing prog rock with my dad constantly butting in, being like, when's the song gonna start? When are they gonna start singing? That defined my childhood, basically.
When do they stop tuning their instruments?
Yeah. Look, you play the song Wish You Were Here. They're just playing the guitar through a radio. When are they going to start playing? No. And so, like...
You're very, very soon into the song.
I know. I was being...
Answer that question.
I was being facetious, I guess. No, so this song is interesting me for that reason, and this album, I suppose, interests me for that reason, in that I grew up with, like, Shine On You Crazy Diamonds completely out of context, and I grew up with like a mythology around the songs I had to grow to understand that we'll get into. But then there's like the proper history around the album that I find really interesting, and some really haunting stories behind it. So the album for me is like, it's probably the last of the Pink Floyd classics that I approach to fully process as a piece and not just bits I'd heard sporadically across my youth over long car rides, you know? And as a result, I grew to see it as maybe not the most like ambitious of that run of classics, although they're all very ambitious, but probably the most like true to emotions I feel in my day-to-day.
Yeah, I mean,
like across the board.
Like, I mean, you have the gigantically ambitious sort of whole concepts of a record like Dark Side of the Moon, which are, you know, obviously very rooted in the human experience, all that sort of thing. But then you have Wish You Were Here, which is a much more, I guess, comparatively scaled down, intimate sort of emotional album at its core. And that I think speaks to the sort of lasting appeal that it's had. And I think the fact that for a lot of people, it is the sort of gateway into Pink Floyd, as in terms of loving it. Even if you hear Dark Side first, this record is often the one that really makes it click.
Yeah, like this was the album, even though I love Dark Side already, and I love the Wall album already, this was the album where I sort of understood how this can become your favorite band, where there's that emotional gateway into it. And then like I watched the movie of The Wall and there was no looking back for me really. But this record, even though I'd heard lots of the albums already, this is like listening to the Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust of David Bowie, incidentally, where it's like, this is the key into the artist, you know, or like, I suppose for Kanye fans, 808s and Heartbreak, you know, like this is where the core of the artist lies. And if I dig into that, secrets will be revealed.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And like, just to build on what you were saying, as well as to contextualize it in their career, the recurring feeling I had while listening to it this week to prepare for this is that in a lot of respects, this feels like the last Pink Floyd album.
Yep, sure does.
Before it became the Roger Waters show. And that's not to say that the members of Pink Floyd didn't together create in a unified way great music after this record, but in many ways this feels like the goodbye, and in obvious ways as well as in subtle ways, it's like the goodbye to the entity that began when they formed. And that obviously ties into the kind of core concept of the record, to the band's evolution in the wake of the departure of founding member Syd Barrett, the specter that his legacy and their estranged relationship with him was hanging over, especially once they started getting successful and reflecting on how far they had come. And in making this album, and obviously in terms of the classic well-told story of Syd's supposedly entirely coincidental visitation to the Abbey Road studios while the band were making this record. In fact, some accounts say that it was the day that one of the days they were recording the song about him, "Shine On You Crazy Diamond." Calling that a song is not even right, because it's a piece. It's this lengthy composition. And
this was the account I read, was when they were recording that this happened.
Yeah, and then that it's this lengthy composition that sandwiches the songs. But anyway, so yeah, that's obviously a key core part of it. That's a huge part of the lore, one of the big sort of Pink Floyd stories that gets told and handed down. I'm sure everyone watching this already knows. But Wish You Were Here is the ultimate eulogy for the figure who sat at the center of the band's foundation, but it also feels like a kind of definitive bow around everything up to that point, and almost like a eulogy for the band in a certain respect as well. It feels as though, regardless of your personal feelings on it, it feels like the band knew they made their masterpiece with Dark Side, or at least the album that they had been reaching for ever since Syd left, but that hadn't crystallized until that point. And then Wish You Were Here, in relation to it, rather than attempting to top Dark Side of the Moon or even build on it, is kind of like a final hurrah to ceremoniously bring things full circle, emotionally at least, because sonically they were obviously in an entirely different place from where they began, a place that wouldn't feel right to ape. And this is an album that is wrapped up in a lot of other things as well that relate to this core reflective notion, discussed at the music industry, the machine itself, the way that it had consumed them and corrupted them and commodified them in a way that must have felt particularly stark and unpleasant when reflecting on the Syd days, when reflecting where they came from, even as they had moved farther and farther away from the primitive but haunted pop music of those humble beginnings. I think what really elevates this record is that these concerns of the reflection upon the legacy of Syd and their relationship with him and their preoccupations with music industry troubles, corruption, all those sorts of things are actually neatly tied in. These two ideas are neatly tied into this wider kind of broader thesis that this album has in terms of the ultimate personal statement of Pink Floyd, the band. Like, they've made their big grand statement about humanity and society with Dark Side of the Moon, and this is their grand statement about themselves, about their more meta-reflexive meditation on what it is that brought them to that point, who the people are behind these things. And in many ways you become more acutely aware than ever before of the individual contributions of each member of Pink Floyd, the ways in which they're starkly distinct from each other, are charismatic in their own unique idiosyncratic ways, and fully unified in a way that is more true here than on any other album that they would ever make or had made.
Yeah, it's interesting because you may have noticed, viewers, new background. I'm in a new place now. Move's been great, but it's been interesting talking to my flatmate about my past, right? In a way that just in the last week, I've had this album on the docket for months, but just in the last week, I've really grown to connect with it in a new way by being sort of open about my history, which, if you didn't know, I've had my own struggles with depression and addiction. I've been very open about that. And I think about the history of Syd Barrett's role in the band, and it connects with the history of like a generation of the whole band with that they talked about on The Wall later.
Mhm.
And the way that all of this generational trauma was sublimated with drugs in the 60s, which slowly destroyed Syd Barrett. And I think about the song Shine On You Crazy Diamonds. It's not a song, it's a 2-part, 19-part suite, right? And it's this ode to this person who shone beautifully but slowly destroyed themselves through trying to reach inside of themselves to find that part of themselves that could be that pure, refined diamond of creativity. And it's a beautiful metaphor, and it's told beautifully. But I find in Syd Barrett's story a version of myself I could have become if things had gone differently. So when I listen to the album, it hits me in that very particular way of like, wow, I've just become in part of this version of myself that I put a lot of effort into burying in a way that's probably very unhealthy. But this is like, it reminds me of a lot of the good work I did to be the person I am now, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It says a lot to the power of Shine On You Crazy Diamond as this 9-part suite piece, that there is such a rich tapestry of emotions evoked there from minimal lyricism. Like the lyrics that are there are very potent and powerful and simplistic and beautiful and tragic. But what is so accomplished about the piece is, I mean, there's levels to it, like, or the way in which the band are kind of so singularly focused on the musicality as this purely emotionally evocative thing. Like every element of the musicality in this piece is there in a way that speaks to a very clear emotion that is expressed in this very earnest and powerful way. And that's an immediately striking thing that I think is a big part of the appeal of this piece throughout the years and throughout the decades. And also as well, just contextually, Pink Floyd have been a band that have been refining these notions of like side-long, multi-part suite songs across their albums leading up to this. And in a sense, you could argue that Dark Side of the Moon is kind of like one entire suite on 2 sides of vinyl. But they have these, you know, big on records like Adam Heart Mother, on records like Metal, on records like Saucer Full of Secrets, on a bunch of their records, right? You have these singularly contained songs that are a part of the tapestry, and these wider suites that kind of either provide a counterpoint or a moment of reflection or a moment of fulsome sort of filling out of the musical ideas of the rest of their respective albums. And the way that Wish You Were Here is structured to separate this suite into these 2 distinct halves that bookend the album and kind of support and lift up the songs in the middle is a unique structural decision that massively strengthens this album, I think, and makes it really stand out in a way, because it feels very much like this continuous story is being told from start to finish. And the specter, the shadow, the memory, the image of Syd is this thing that is hanging across the album, not contained to one side of vinyl. It's this thing that is that is there immediately as you're entering into the world of the album, is communicated to you through those first 5 parts of Shine On, then lingers as the band explore different territory or drift into related but different themes, and then eventually circle back to him again at the conclusion. And so that's what's so powerful about the way that this album is structured. And in terms of, if you relate it to previous Pink Floyd records, where those gigantic suites have been isolated to a single side as this counterpoint to all the other music on the other side of vinyl, whereas here, everything, all the music on this record is completely unified and flowing into each other. And that's what makes it such a powerful listen.
I think what I found really interesting about the structure is that it feels like it forms this like this like dip graph or a normal distribution with like a bell curve,
Sure.
where you have Shine Your Own Crazy Diamonds and like Wish You Were Here is in the middle, but that's not the track listing you have, but it feels a bit like that. And I think what's so interesting, you have the first few suites of Shine On Your Crazy Diamonds, which is, if you were to release those first few parts just as an EP, it will be perfect in itself, you know? And then you go into Welcome to the Machine. And what I find so powerful about that song is it's almost like this is how someone like Syd would feel in this corporate scenario. You know, this is how it would feel to be this kind of troubled visionary eaten up and chewed out, you know, followed by Have a Cigar, which is a much more realistic version of dealing with the corporate bureaucracy.
Well, it's notable that both those songs as well are from the perspective of these kind of shadowy figures who are, you know, greedily seeking to consume and creating this situation where peoples are either directly mistreated or the groundwork is laid for them to fall into a trap that will ultimately lead to their spiraling. And what I love about that, another thing I love about that structuring is that you have these bookends, overarching bookends of this massive piece. And then you also, while these three songs in the middle kind of flow out of and then into that piece in their own way as well, they're also kind of a self-contained narrative in its own right. Right, like a lot of people say that Wish You Were Here is a song about Syd, and I think David Gilmour has said that when he plays it now, that is what it is to him. But Roger Waters has said that when he wrote it, he initially wasn't writing that song about Syd. It was a song he wrote to himself about I guess confronting the world and your expectations and the place that you're in, and the distance from how you thought things were going to be and how things are, and that great kind of human condition thing. And so this stretch of three songs at the center of this record is kind of this narrative that represents, you know, that is then reflected in the overarching piece where it's like you're swallowed up by this machine, and then you're left in this position of being lost, being at a crossroads, being unable to reconcile the way things used to be with the way things are, the potential with the reality, and all of those sorts of things. That's what's so beautiful about the album is it's these two aspects of it, this gigantic piece and then these supporting parts are perfectly in concert with each other, but also reflecting each other in this different way. So it makes it, in my opinion, as close to a perfect album as there could possibly be.
And on the note of the title track, Wish You Were Here, that needs a whole dissection in itself, you know. Just the writing in the song blows me away every time. Like every line, like at least for the first verse and for a lot of the song in general, it's these sort of couplets of questions asking the central protagonist of what they've gained versus what they've sacrificed for something of worth versus something of import, you know. Like the line that I've just become obsessed with, I've always been obsessed with, but especially going back to this album, I tweeted about it that you've all seen, where it's did you exchange your walk-on partner war for a lead role in a cage? And it's just this perfect image of what they're trying to encapsulate. The structure is amazing, and they do that first verse into the chorus, and then it's a lot of soloing, and then back into the chorus and an outro. The structure is immaculate, but it feels organic.
What's great about that couplet that you highlighted, which I would incidentally, even if you hadn't tweeted about it earlier, I would also have highlighted as the best lyric in the song, is that it's kind of like it's meaningful in all those ways that you said. Like it's a beautiful summation of the feeling of the song, but also like the walk-on part versus lead role thing ties in nicely to the sort of like, you know, entertainment industry setting of the previous songs as well. It's like an extension of that sort of metaphor into the song. So again, just it all ties together perfectly. It's really immaculate writing.
Something that's also really great is the way that the instrumentation complements this very delicate feeling. It doesn't sacrifice the prog rock kind of instrumental insight as to what you can do with your instruments and improving that and finding insights into that. It doesn't sacrifice that kind of technical foresight
Mhm.
for any kind of emotional impact at all. They're both there in equal measures, and it's just it never fails to be mind-blowingly skillful,
Mhm.
but with a purpose, you know.
Absolutely. Jake, August, do you guys want to jump in here? I'm sure you guys both have things to add about the impressions that this album leaves on you and the feelings you have when you listen to it.
I think one of the appeals of Wish You Were Here is that it sounds like an album you've already heard in a way. In that I think the sounds generated here are just so classic and so immediate that it's a record where once you hear it, it's something. And I think this is a lot of the appeal of Pink Floyd in general over most other progressive rock bands. Not that Pink Floyd themselves are entirely prog, but their writing, their structure lends itself to a certain immediacy where after just one brush with their albums, and also their lyrical simplicity and directness in most cases, leads it so a listener can easily derive from what they want to get out of the album, mostly in one listen. Although this is not to say that this album is simplistic, because it is far from that. I really love the reincorporation of what is noted as the Syd rhythm throughout the Shine On You Crazy Diamond suite. This really simple little musical motif that you hear incorporated, distorted, perverted, and ultimately it comes back in its simplest form on throughout the runtime of this split suite. And I think that's a really good way this album kind of unifies itself as this one whole. And the music industry commentary here is anything but subtle. I think that's more a feature than a bug on this album, and it is something you just have to generally accept when listening to this album, that if you are looking for Pink Floyd lyricism that is going to take you some time to digest,
Yeah.
well,
I think it kind of that lack of subtlety, where it kind of sometimes can harm other bits of what Roger Waters' lyricism on other albums, works here because it's contrasted with the tenderness of the Shine On You Crazy Diamond lyricism and the Wish You Were Here lyricism. Like there's a contrast between the tenderness of when they're singing about something that means a great deal to them and the harshness of this contrasting thing. And so I think it's for me, like that I guess lack of subtlety, and also the decision to have I have to get his name, Roy Harper, the great folk legend Roy Harper, sing lead on Have a Cigar to just get that extra venom, works because of that aspect of the album.
And I mean, I don't even disagree is the thing. I think lyrically that is a perfectly fine decision, especially when the band's forays into space rock have certainly aged far better than 99% of contemporaries in their same sound. I think a lot of that is aided by a really smart selection of synthesizer tones to use on this album.
Yes.
Because they are very selective with what they pick, what Pink Floyd picks to put on these records. And I don't know by what process they even went about this, but they picked out synthesizers that, while both a little on the warmer and more glistening side, don't sound like total aged crap, which is astonishing.
I'm so glad you brought that up, August, because I was going to get to this eventually, but the synthesizer sounds on this record, I think, are maybe my favorite thing about it. And I love a lot. I love everything about this record, everything. But the synthesizer sounds and the variation in synthesizer and electronic textures that come to the fore on this record, especially relative to their previous records, are other fucking worldly. And I think that extent to which you talked about the album feeling classic is a really great point as well, right? Because in many ways it kind of distilled to its simplest but most beautiful form all of the kind of musical complexities of progressive rock and tying it all into this core elemental emotional thing that people resonate with. But that as soon as that general synthesizer tone kicks in, as soon as you start the album, you immediately feel like you're in this very classic and warm and cinematic place. Like, it reminds me, especially as someone who grew up thanks to my dad on Pink Floyd and like the classic 70s burgeoning electronic music artists like Jean-Michel Jarre and all that sort of thing. Hearing that same sort of like classic pristine tone and texture I'm already sold. And then the way that you have some Rick Wright it's hard to pick an MVP. Gilmour soloing on this record is just as good as he's ever soloed. But Rick Wright might be my MVP for all of the stuff that he's doing on this album with all of the various instruments that he uses, the Hammond organ stuff he's doing, the absolute miles of mileage he gets out of the Mini Moog, the clavinet as well, all of the things that he's doing, all of the electronic textures and additional instrumentation above and beyond the guitar stuff is so key. It's like, it's hard not to envision Rick Wright as maybe the greatest keyboardist in any rock band ever. He just has that very particular but crucial creative drive that adds so many layers of brilliance to this album.
And if there is something, I must further comment on about these synthesizers on a personal level. I've mentioned offhand before that Pink Floyd served as an influence to the early sound of my work as Glacier Flower. And to me, this album is a lot of where some of those sounds came from, because this is where that early synthesizer fuckery is really perfected in their career. So I that's just another personal note for why I think this is such a great sounding record.
Yeah, no,
that's the thing about the record. It's like, I feel like everyone who loves this record has like a different, very personal reason for loving it, and I think that's part of why it's very cool, is that people respond to it on a very deeply personal level, the way maybe other records don't resonate in that way.
Just to dig back into some of those sounds and again, this spending time with this record this week, because this record was a huge fixture of my childhood, like it was, I'm presuming, for a lot of people, to the extent to which I kind of felt like after a certain point, I didn't really need to listen to it again. I just knew it all in my head. But actually having to listen to it again for this week really made some things come into focus for me. And previously, my favorite Pink Floyd record was Animals, but this has overtaken it. This is absolutely my favorite Pink Floyd album, because I think of all of these things that we've talked about, this absolutely immaculate confluence of sound, theme, everything about it makes it absolutely 100% my new favorite Pink Floyd album. And I think part of the moment where I realized that was listening to this record and going from the first suite of Shine On You Crazy Diamond to Welcome to the Machine, which is a song, I think there might even be a bit on this podcast once where I kind of like offhandedly dissed it. I think I probably maybe built that up a bit just to piss you guys off, but that did happen. I remember it happening. And I listened to this.
It worked, jackass.
I know, right? And I listened to this,
and you were
week,
incorrect.
And I was fucking wrong, because this song is immaculate, like everything else about this record. And I was really struck. Like, obviously, it's this really pained vocal that you have in this song that's very kind of, and just the general kind of industrial tone of it is so like chilling. And obviously, like, you can see how that general tone is super influential on a lot of like no wave and industrial music that would come, like, in a very, just in that element of it. But the combination of sound here is otherworldly. Like, when that crisp acoustic guitar comes in to kind of fill out that classic sounding synthesizer, it's this rich and warm texture that by association with the rest of the song sounds disorienting, disarming, and straight up wrong. The squelching synth wails during the instrumental on this track sound gargantuan and corrosive. They actually at points sound like they are squealing in pain. And that is, I think, again, courtesy to MVP Rick Wright, who has this incredible ability to wrangle these incredible emotions and power out of these synthesizers. He does the same sort of tricks on Have a Cigar as well. And also on, I think, when people think of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, they think of Gilmour's guitar work, understandably so. He has multiple incredible solos across all 9 parts of that piece. I'm particularly enamored with his soloing in part 6, the first part of the second half of this track, which is out of this world. The way he kind of ascends the scale, like going up an octave, higher and higher and higher with his soloing in this part, communicating the sense of increasing urgency, right? That is so in tandem with how this piece is progressing. And it feels unfucking bearable to listen to at a certain point. It's mind-melting guitar work. And then so that's great, but also, like, I feel like a thing that gets undervalued and people are like, oh yeah, Shine On Your Crazy Diamond is good, but like the first part's better than the second part. I have seen people say that, and I'm like, how can you differentiate the two? They're one big thing. But what I love that seems to be underrated is how great the actual like synthesizer and key soloing is, as well as the guitar soloing. Wright's mini moog and clavinet work takes precedence in part 8, and it gets really playful and exploratory as this, and as playful and exploratory as this album gets. I feel his work gets particularly underrated here in the closing stretch. It's less dominating within the mix, but it glides beautifully. And then it fades out, and part 9 settles in, which has been described by Gilmour as a funeral march for Syd, this specific part at the end. And it has that gloomy quality that feels as though the casket is being laid to rest at last.
Yeah.
Beautiful closing grace note is also that in the final seconds of the whole album, you get a short interpolation of the melody from See Emily Play, which is probably the definitive song that Syd Barrett ever wrote. And it's this kind of beautiful moment that the record ends on. And there's so much detail and clarity and purpose to each musical and instrumental development within these pieces that I struggle to fault them in the slightest, in the way that you could really, if you wanted to really pick apart a lot of long prog instrumental pieces, you probably could find structural quirks and flaws to point out. But it's fucking airtight in Wish You Were Here.
I have one serious and one funny point to make. The serious point is that the thing that Syd Barrett famously said when he went into the studio with all of his hair and eyebrows shaved off, that would later be referenced in the movie for the war. The thing that he famously said when he walked into the studio and heard Shine On You Crazy Diamonds, a song about him, he said it sounded old, which I find really interesting, because it's both an incredibly fresh voice and prog music, but it's obviously old. It encompasses such a deep sense of history, and like, it sounds old in a good way to me, because it sounds like a song that encompasses a very rich past. And I think that's kind of what I love about it. And I love it also because it encompasses the wholeness of a person, you know?
Yeah, that's like the funeral eulogy thing that I think it kind of represents as well, that he might have been tapping into, is the sense that it is what you're hearing is a reflection of a life. Or also maybe he just thought that it didn't have enough fucking weirdo instruments in it. Like, you know, he could have meant anything.
I mean, the man was fundamentally insane at that point. So
he could have meant anything, but I think you pointing that out is a good thing to do, because it is kind of telling in a certain sense as well.
Not to start any shit here or anything. I'm sure this could probably be contested by at least one of you, but I'm going to go ahead and say it just because I don't know. I don't have much interesting else to contribute. But if I had to say who among us is the biggest Pink Floyd fan, I'd probably pick myself. Not to say that that's a point of bragging rights. If anything, it probably means you should take my opinion less seriously. But that said, you know, I've said multiple times, The Wall used to be my favorite album of all time. Still pretty fucking high up there. Still my favorite Pink Floyd album, but it was never because The Wall was perfect. It was never because The Wall was this achievement. It was because I connected to it and I latched onto it and I developed a relationship with it. Wish You Were Here is an album that I also did that with as well, because of course I did. And because it's fucking, I mean, like goddamn, look at this.
Oh my.
You've seen this cover before. This is like the most iconic album cover of all time.
I just want to highlight how hard
Dark
Storm
Side of the
Jefferson
Moon.
this cover.
Yeah, I mean, they're both equally iconic, I would say.
I would
just-
argue Dark Side is more iconic, if I have to be
Probably
snippy
right. I mean,
about
I
it.
own a Pink Floyd shirt. Guess which album's on it?
But I love the way in which, like, the guy who's on fire was on fire for about 3 seconds for it to be put out, or else he'll die. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Just amazing cover.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh, Morgan repping.
I wish I
I
had.
have the opportunity. It is not the Beatles White Album.
Oh, the
Oh, is that The Wall?
It
Yeah.
is the first,
Oh shit.
Oh, wow.
first pressing.
Gatefold sexies.
Whoa.
Pressing
Were those
you can
inside?
find now has the wall right there, and this
Oh
does
my
not.
god.
I kind of like it
Were
better
those-
without the text. Like that cover, I think just
Yeah.
the bricks is great.
Just the handwritten lyrics.
Oh, that's cool. That's a cool touch.
Dope.
Yeah.
With that said, should we move into favorite tracks and ratings?
Sure.
Be happy to. Jake, what are your? I mean, when an album has 5 tracks,
I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't write any
Yeah.
down.
and you could really argue it only has 4.
that's true.
But I
Very
mean,
true.
But you could rank them if you want, I guess. Instead, I don't know.
Nah.
Just say,
I won't.
just rate it.
Yeah, 10.
I'd give it 8.
It's a 10.
I'm also giving it a 10.
And lo and behold, in accordance with my decree that this is a perfect album and my new favorite Pink Floyd album, I am also giving it a 10.
Remember
Amazing.
when you had it at a 9?
Yeah,
Remember that?
I remember yesterday. Yes.
So
Got him good.
that's a 9.6 average. You'll equivalent to Hand Cannot Erase, Third, Bone Machine, Blackwater Park. Like,
Yeah, and look, if you're a new viewer who stumbled onto this and you see that we have those albums all rated the same, you'll probably fucking really like those videos because the overlap is definitely there. Well, there we fucking go. Good video. Let us know in the comments below what this album means to you. If you think that we missed anything in our discussion of what is so great about this record, what's your favorite Pink Floyd album? If not this one, let us know in the comments below. We love to hear from you. Make sure you like and subscribe as well for new videos. And August, why don't you lead us out?
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Coca-Cola. It's the real thing.